Hello everyone, I'm Lindsay from Happy Hour Stitches, and thank you so much for joining me as we sew block 1 of the Happy Hour Stitches block of the month together. Now in this video, I will be sharing some of my best tips for sewing this block, as well as some products I love that make the process a little easier. Now before we dive in, let me explain the block of the month a little bit for those who are new to this project. This block of the month is free to my email subscribers for a limited time. So if you're not already signed up, make sure to click the link in the video description to sign up. And each month in 2025, you'll receive a free block pattern sent to your email, as well as the setting and the finishing instructions later this year. It's just gonna be so much fun to connect with other quilters and just prioritize joyful sewing time each month. So here's block 1. It's January's block. So make sure you check your email for this block pattern. And you can get all of the resources about the block of the month, including fabric requirements, schedule, everything. All of those details are on my blog, which you can find in the video description. It's just gonna be such a fun year of sewing together. So let's get started on block 1. So I have all my pieces cut out here and organized, and I did give them all a good press, and I actually used this flatter spray, which is a starch-free smoothing spray, so it gets rid of all the wrinkles. And I also find it just makes them a lot easier to sew. It gives them like a little bit of stiffness. So that's how I have prepared my fabrics. And so let's get started. First, we're gonna make our corner unit. So let me gather the pieces and we'll start sewing. To make our corner units, we're going to sew 2 squares together and then this rectangle on top. And this is like what our corner unit will look like. So I'm going to start by sewing these 2 squares together, and I'm actually going to chain piece all of these. We have to make 4 total corner units. So I'm going to chain piece all of these pieces at once when I'm over at my sewing machine. So I just got them prepped, so I can just bring my cutting mat over to my sewing machine and everything will be in order for me to sew. Okay, so I just have my 2 squares. I'm going to put them right sides together here. I'm just going to sew them together using a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, and then when I get to the end, I'm going to just keep chain piecing my other squares together. So I stop when I'm off the other 2 squares. I'll just keep sewing until I'm done. So before I can add my rectangles to the top of this unit, I need to cut these apart and press them. And I wanted to share just this fun little product I got that makes cutting these chain pieced units apart easier. So this is actually one of my old rotary cutter blades, and you can just stick it in here. This is magnetic, so it has a tight hold. And you can see you can turn it, so when one side of the blade gets dull, you can turn it to a different side, and this just sits on your desk, and then I can just come in here and cut these units apart so easily. It's such a fun product. It's a great way to make more use of your old rotary cutter blades. I just love it, and it's cute. So let's go press these units now. So we're at my ironing board, and I'm actually going to press on a wool pressing mat. And for those unfamiliar with this, it's just like a small wool square you can put on top of your ironing board, and it actually lets the heat soak through your pieces, and it kind of collects in this wool mat so that the mat also gets a little warm. So it's like you're pressing your seams from both sides, the top and the bottom, and I find I get really nice seams that way. So I actually like to press my pieces from the top of the pieces. So you'll see I'm just going to open up my seam. We're going to press toward the darker unit here, and I'm just going to open it up so it's right sides up. I'm just going to come in with my iron, make sure my seam's going in the right way, and just give it a good press. And look at that nice flat result. I'm just going to do this with all of my pieces. Okay, now we're gonna sew our rectangle to the top like this. So I'm just gonna layer my pieces right sides together and sew along that edge with a 1/4 inch seam. And again, I'm going to chain piece all of these corner units to make it go faster. Okay, I'm back at my ironing board to press these units. Now, normally you might think you might press towards the rectangle we just added, but in this case, we're actually going to press towards those pieced squares. Because of how the block comes together, this is gonna help us reduce seam bulk in later steps. So we're gonna press toward the square side. Okay, and our corner units are done. We've made 4 of them. Now we're gonna move on to the side units, which are made up of flying geese units. For this block, we need 8 total flying geese units, 4 from one color and 4 from another. And I have laid out all my rectangles here and 1 square for each of them because I'm going to chain piece these units just like I did before. So I'll chain piece 1 square to every rectangle before I trim and press. And so the directions will call for you to mark a diagonal line on the wrong side of a square. And I wanted to show you a few different methods I use for this so you can choose your favorite. So I just have my square. I've turned it so it's right side down. Now, a traditional method would just have you take a ruler, align the corners, and then just take like a pencil or like an erasable marking tool, and you would just draw the line. I did this method for years. Then I discovered Hera markers, which this is one of my favorite tools of all time. You use it similar to like a rotary cutter or a pencil, but it leaves a crease line. So I would do that same method, turn my square with the right side down, align my ruler from corner to corner, and then I would just use my Hera marker, and you can see it leaves that nice crease line. I love this method. Another method I've been using a lot is, especially when I'm sitting at my machine and I maybe don't want to get up and mark my squares, I will just take this square and I'll just fold it in half and I'll finger press it, and you still get a great line. I find this is the easiest method for me because I can do it while I'm sitting at my machine right before I sew, and that's easy. And then there's one more method I want to share, a tool actually that I love. So let's go over to my sewing machine and I'll show you. So another easy method I use when making like flying geese units is, you might have noticed this little tape on my machine. This actually comes on a roll of tape. It's diagonal seam tape from Cluck Cluck Sew, and it has like 1/4 inch lines and then a center line, and this is for your diagonal seams that you may be doing. So I've just installed this on my machine, and basically when I'm sewing, I know I need to sew in my flying geese from this corner to this corner, and so I would just align these with the red lines, and I'll use that to sew these units, and that means I don't have to mark at all. I just follow these handy lines on my machine. How easy was that? So another trick when I'm making flying geese is I like to start sewing from the middle of the rectangle, not the point. I find when I start sewing from the point, sometimes my machine can suck that point down into the machine, but I always get a kind of a smooth start to my sewing when I start from the middle of the rectangle. Now we need to trim this seam line away, a 1/4 inch away, and then we'll press that square open. Before I trim, I always like to just check that when I press this open, the square is covering what I'm cutting off so that I still have this complete rectangle. And if it's not quite covering it completely, then I still have my square intact. I can rip this seam out and re-sew so that I'm getting really accurate flying geese. But this one looks perfect. So I'm just gonna take this, measure a 1/4 inch away from the seam I just sewed, and just cut. And I'm gonna do this for all of the flying geese. Okay, now we're going to be pressing that square open, and I'm going to show you a little pressing tip, especially for units like flying geese where we're pressing open. Like sometimes we can get a little bump here when we're pressing, or we might not get a perfectly straight seam, but there is a trick for that. So if you actually press on top of your unit first, we're not pressing open, we're just pressing, it helps these threads get warm and they sink into the fabric, and they really become like part of the fabric, so that when you go to press open, there's no bulk there anymore with the thread. And it just helps get a nice crisp line on those diagonal seams. Like how nice is that? So we'll just press on top, and then we'll just press open in one smooth motion. It's gonna give us nice shapes on these rectangles. So to finish our flying geese units, we're going to be adding a second square to the other end of each rectangle and sewing this way. Now, before I said I like to start sewing in the middle because I get a smoother sewing, but now we have this seam bulk up here. So if I start sewing from this very tip, I'm going to have problems. So I'm going to actually sew from the corner. But because I don't want my machine to eat my corner, I'm going to use a little leader strip. This is actually a trim off from our flying geese units we're making. And I'm just going to start sewing on that and then sew directly on here. And this little scrap is just going to help me get a smooth start to my seam, and so my machine does not eat that corner. Now we're going to sew these together to make our side units. So we're going to sew 2 flying geese units together. And I'm going to share a trick that I use when I'm working with units that have points that I don't want to cut off. So I'm going to put these units right sides together, and then I'm going to flip it. So I'm sewing with the point facing up. And that way, when I'm sewing with my 1/4 inch, if I see that my 1/4 inch is maybe a little too close to that point, I'm gonna cut it off, I can fudge it a little bit, and I can kind of change my sewing line so it's going right along the point instead of through it. So let's give this a try. So I'm stopping when I'm coming close just to make sure everything looks good, and it looks like I'm not going to sew through that point, so I'm just going to slowly go through it. And let's see, look at that. 2 beautiful points on these. So that is just an easy tip you can use just to make sure that you don't lose any points when you're sewing these together. You can always fudge it a little bit, you know? Okay, so we're gonna be pressing our side unit seams up, so in the direction the flying geese are pointing. But since we're starting to work with some bulk in our seams, I wanted to share a few secret weapons I use to make sure we're continuing to get really flat seams. So I don't use any steam in my iron. I found that adding water to my irons has caused some problems with me in the past. So I actually have an external spray bottle I use that's just filled with some filtered water. It's a continuous spray bottle, which I love. That means I don't have to crank it to get water. I just give it one little push and it kind of gets a nice fine mist spray. So I might just add a little water to those seams. I'm gonna press from the front. And then just to make sure everything is staying really flat, I have a clapper here, a wooden clapper. And also I'll just lay this to the side and I will put my clapper right on top of that middle seam. And that is just gonna keep that bulk down. It's gonna make my unit really flat and make sure it's the right size so that it fits with everything else we're sewing. Now's the fun part. We get to assemble our block. So we have our center square here. I have our corner units, and I'm gonna rotate these so that the orange piece is always facing that center piece. Here we go. And then I have my flying geese units, and those are going to point out. These are little side units here. Ooh, I just love how it's looking. So we're gonna bring this over to our sewing machine and we're gonna sew them together in rows like this, seams here. Okay, I'm basically gonna take pieces from each row and sew them together. Like you can see here, my seams should nest, so there should be no bulk where things are coming together here. So we'll just make sure everything is aligned. Sew with a 1/4 inch and we're almost done. Our rows are done. We're gonna press away from our side units. So we're gonna be pressing towards our corner units and towards that center square. And again, because we're dealing with some bulk, we're gonna use our secret weapons. Just a little mist or steam on those seams we're pressing away. Okay, here we are. And then we're just gonna put this clapper on top just to press down as well as we can here. Okay, and here we're pressing towards that center square. So in this case, I'm gonna press from the back. Normally I like to press from the front, but it is hard when you're pressing from the front to press inward. So we're just gonna press from the back in this case. Here we go, things are coming together. And now we're going to sew our 3 rows together and our block will be complete. Okay, we're gonna put things right sides together. Now you can use pins if you want. I am generally not a pin user. So I'll just like to go through, make sure all of our seams are nesting nicely across. You can throw in some pins around those seams if you want. If not, we'll just sew with our 1/4 inch. So as you're sewing this block together, just kind of like we did before when we didn't want to cut the points off the tips of our flying geese, we don't want to cut them off here either. So you can just check as you're sewing when you're going through your flying geese that your seam line is at the point of that, so you're not cutting any tips off anything you're sewing. One final press and we're done. So we're going to be pressing away from that center row. So I've already sprayed a little water so we get nice flat seams. It's going to go slow here. And here's our finished block. Isn't it so beautiful? I did just give this a little trim just to make sure it was measuring the correct unfinished size. And just to give you an idea, this is how much I had to trim off. Just making sure everything was all square. It was measuring the correct size so that it goes together with our other, with the setting and the other blocks really beautifully. So yay, we did it. Thank you so much for sewing block 1 with me. I just love this block and I can't wait to see everyone's versions. So make sure you share on social media. You can tag me at Happy Hour Stitches, or you can email me photos. I just love seeing what everyone's creating. And make sure you check out the blog for all the resources needed, links to the products I mentioned in this video, everything you need to make this block of the month successful for you. And since it's January and I know a lot of people are starting new projects, I just wanted to point out this quilt behind me. It is my book club quilt. So it's a bookshelf filled with books, plants, little teacups, a variety of items. I actually set up this project to be another year-long project. So I have been using it as a reading tracker. So there is one book on these shelves for every book I've read in the past year. I'm doing another one. I'm just finishing up last year's one right now. So I'll have multiple book club quilts. But if you are someone who also likes to read and you want to join our book club and just kind of sew along and track your book progress, we have lots of great resources on how to quilt along there. And this pattern is available at Happy Hour Stitches. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you are looking for another project where you can just make a few blocks a month and have a beautiful quilt at the end of the year. So I will see everyone next month for a new block pattern for this block of the month. So thank you so much for joining me for this little happy hour of sewing time.